Now, unfortunately, the first Doctor didn't have a sonic screwdriver, so this will have to do. So I've recommenced something that I've been putting off, well, not putting off, but having a hard time finding time to do, and I'm gonna try and integrate it into the channel. As you may have noticed, pretty much all my Doctor Who lists up to this point have been focused entirely, almost entirely at least, on New Who. That is because there are significant gaps in my Classic Who knowledge. I've seen samples of all the Doctors, I've seen what are generally considered to be the best episodes of Classic Era, but there's still a lot of holes, and there's a lot of significant stories that maybe aren't always considered to be the best, but I still haven't seen before. So this is me starting I'm gonna say an occasional, no commitment for how often I'm going to get around to this, but reviews of Classic Era stories as I either revisit them because I haven't seen them for a very long time, or see them for the first time and share my feelings about them. Now, even though I am going to be starting with the very first Doctor Who story, this is not a commitment for me to do this in chronological order. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm more likely going to jump around to whatever I feel like at the time, or whatever I happen to get my hands on. So I really do want to try and keep a fairly steady stream of Doctor Who related content going. I am well aware that that is how most people have found my channel. That's what most people are here to see. So I have no illusions about that, even though I try and keep up a fairly steady diet of other material as well. But as much as I've sort of decided for myself, I want one video a week to be Doctor Who related, I also don't want to keep eating up that time with lists, because I've got a number of lists still planned, but I don't want to burn through those ideas and start just making stupid lists for the sake of it, just dumb premises. So in the interest of doing no more than 2 lists a month, if that at all, this is the sort of thing that will probably fill in when Doctor Who is not airing new stuff and there's been no news that's broken. So with all of that preamble out of the way more than is probably necessary, let's talk about The Unearthly Child, which is generally what we now call the first 4 episodes of Doctor Who, because for a while each episode had individual names, as opposed to later where they just called it by one story, then it was part 1, part 2, part 3, etc. I should say up front that also with these classic reviews, I am going to talk spoilers. I mean, this is all really crazy old stuff. I'm in this particular case, I don't expect I'm gonna get like deep into anything that is supposed to be surprising over the course of the story, but yeah, I'm not gonna be wary of them. I actually had only seen clips of this one. The initial first Doctor story that I saw was the Daleks, which is the second one, but if I ever talk about that one, I need to rewatch it. It's been a very long time. My favorite of the first Doctor stories that I've seen, because I've seen a couple others, I've seen the Time Meddler, I saw the Aztecs. My favorite though is Dalek Invasion of Earth. But this one I actually had not seen front to back before, just clips from it, usually almost entirely from the first episode out of the 4. So I didn't have a ton of expectation. I really wasn't entirely sure what I was going to get. I was tempering my expectations though, because as much as I do enjoy Classic Era Doctor Who, a lot of it is really dated. Now, in talking about this episode and classic episodes in general, I'm going to try really hard to be fair to them. And by that, I mean, I'm not holding them to modern standards. So I'm going to try and just not, linger too much on wonky, sort of costuming, iffy effects and things like that. Unless I think it is bad even for the time, I might point that out. But for the most part, I really want to focus on the story and the characters, because that's the stuff that's timeless, regardless of whatever else has happened in better effects, better costumes, color, things like that. So I was surprised, actually, at how good this first story was. Not that I expected it to be bad, but I mean, it's it's cavemen. That's kind of the really when you have a time travel device, that's kind of the really obvious thing, is to go back to the Stone Age. So I wasn't expecting a ton out of it, especially knowing it was the first story. I figured there were probably going to be stumbling points, but the first, admittedly, out of the 4 episodes that comprise this whole story, the first one is the best. And it's really surprising watching it now as someone who, you know, obviously has seen samplings of all the Doctor and got hooked in initially on New Who. It's really fascinating how much of a, I don't want to say malevolent, but an untrustworthy, an unsettling figure the Doctor is in his initial appearance. Like, almost everything about him reads more as a potential antagonist than possible future protagonist. I mean, it seems very clear over the course of the story that that Ian is the more traditional hero of the story. You know, he's the take charge guy, and he's the one who tries to impart wisdom to this leader of the cavemen. And the Doctor himself is very standoffish, which, I mean, I expected. I've seen Hartnell before, but just not only in the way he was performed, but the way he is presented, like knowing there's no history for this guy. Like, everything about him sets off a danger warning. His standoffishness, his snappishness, how secretive he is. And it's also really interesting to watch that he's not nearly as on the ball as we're used to seeing. I mean, especially in New Who. I mean, I think it's a criticism largely leveled by fans who grew up on classic Who, that the Doctor kind of is too, you know, together and with it and always on top of things in New Who. And I think that's arguable one way or the other, but regardless of whether you feel that's the case, it's certainly interesting to go back and see a story where, like, he really was caught flat-footed. He was not prepared for this at all. And all these things that are obviously throwing him off for the first time, or he's still getting a handle on, like the fact that he only just notices that the chameleon circuit isn't working. They don't even call it that yet. But, you know, it's still the police box, even though they've gone back in time. So he realizes that's not working. He doesn't know where they've landed until he goes out to collect samples that he would then have to test. He doesn't just step out, sniff the air, know the planet, the galaxy, the time period, and the current season. You know, it's interesting, and it doesn't make either end feel wrong. It's just interesting knowing, oh, he's gonna develop from this that I'm seeing now into what I'm used to seeing in the more modern era. In terms of the other characters, Ian and Barbara, at least as they get initially introduced, work really well. I think it helps that you know, Ian, as much as he kind of becomes a slightly more generic take charge man kind of character as the story goes on, initially, I mean, we see him just being pleasant, you know, with Barbara. They have nice banter. They have good chemistry that doesn't feel like forced romantic chemistry either, which is kind of nice. And Barbara has a strong moral center. She's more open-minded than him. She has a protective streak towards Susan. Susan in the first episode was actually kind of fascinating to me because I feel like she did a really good job of channeling the frustration of somebody who knows way more than this school could actually teach her, and yet misses all the weird little details that someone who just is of this time would know, and her frustration with that. And also in that first episode in particular, she is a little weird. She's a little off-putting. She's a little alien, and you get why Ian and Barbara would have this curiosity about her, because she acts weird, she knows weird stuff, and that is a really good hook. This idea of, there's this girl in our school, she's a little weird, and she knows stuff that doesn't make sense for her to know. Let's find out what's going on there. That's just a really interesting starting place and hook in. And especially, you know, introducing the Doctor. She says he's her grandfather, but you don't know if that's really the case. You don't know if he's somehow, you know, keeping her imprisoned in some way. I mean, with his demeanor, it wouldn't be a huge shock. So all of that, the first episode of this, as far as I'm concerned, is solid gold. I mean, like, I'm stunned how good it is. The rest of the story, once they actually start interacting with the cavemen, is weaker, but not as bad as I was afraid it was gonna be. For starters, actually, the cavemen themselves are surprisingly compelling. I think a big part of what helped is really until the very end, you don't have a firm grasp on who the quote-unquote good guy is in this tribe, because you've got Za and Cal and and the old woman and the younger woman, and they're all just interacting, they're all just trying to survive, and it isn't a case of, oh, this one's the good one, this one's the bad one's. Like, I get where everybody's coming from, and certainly relative to the Doctor and the others, all these people are a problem. I kept going back and forth. So initially I'm like, oh, I really sympathize with this guy who's trying to start the fire and he can't, and he's frustrated. Oh, this other guy, Cal, he's coming in to take over. I bet you Cal's like the usurper and stuff. But then, Cal, says some stuff, he's front and center, and you're like, oh, well, you're not like the archetypal villain that I was expecting. And then Za starts doing some stuff that you're like, oh, you're gonna be the problem. And then, like, the woman kind of whispering in his ear, she's like, she's almost got a Lady Macbeth thing going. But then, they save him, like, oh, well, he'll just be on the Doctor and the companion side now, except he kind of isn't. He's still a problem. There was a surprising amount of nuance to everything that was going on with them. And the sort of the stunted, broken English way of speaking didn't grate on me the way that it usually does with that sort of typical, very dated way of depicting people from that period in time, but it didn't grate on me nearly as much. I think they just found a really good balance of more or less complete sentences and then more broken up ones. They kind of went back and forth, but not so much that it felt like it was inconsistent. It got the point, but didn't hammer you with it. I'd say if there's a genuine weakness to be had, it's in kind of a bit of a de-evolution of Barbara and Susan. Well, de-evolution for Barbara, and then Susan, unfortunately, Susan gets hysterical a lot and quickly, and it gets old really quick, and it's kind of off-putting, especially considering that she travels with the Doctor, and maybe she's not used to being in these types of dangerous situations. This isn't the life he's leading yet, but at the same time, given that she's still from this society and from a life that knows these things, the speed with which she leaps to panic is kind of irritating. Now, it makes a certain degree of sense for how young she is. She's probably a little bit cocky, and then things go wrong. Help! So, I mean, I get it. It makes sense, but boy, she screams a lot. And then I think it was starting in the third episode, Barbara started going hysterical as well, which was, first of all, unnecessary, because we have a hysterical character already in Susan. To have a second hysterical character is redundant. But beyond that, it did feel like a de-evolution for her specifically, because she had a more open mind. She was more able to sort of roll with what was going on, to not just be in denial about it, but to think about it. But once things got dangerous, then she starts panicking, and the man has to get in there and be a man. And it's a little disappointing. I mean, era that it was made in, I get it, I absolutely do, but especially considering that she started out from a stronger position, and again, two hysterical characters is completely redundant. It's a little disappointing, but overall, it's a lot better than I thought it was going to be. It's genuinely good. There are a lot of times where not a lot, but there have been a number of times where I've seen classic era episodes, and I've come away going, that was all right. I'm not sure I'd recommend it to anybody who hasn't already seen it or, isn't trying to be a completist about it. There's a lot of things that I would kind of toss on the, you can skip that one pile. And I kind of expected this to land there, and it doesn't. I mean, it's genuinely really good. Unfortunately, the latter the last 75% of the story is not as strong as the opening quarter of it. But that first episode, wow. I mean, that's gripping and compelling, and the characters are engaging, and it's just really, really good. And then once it gets into the story proper, it's a little weaker, but it's still good and better than I thought it was going to be given the material. It didn't drag nearly as much as I thought it would either. So I was really pleasantly surprised about this. I mean, the excessive use of the hysterical female stereotype is really kind of my only complaint about this. The rest of it is either good or if nothing else, just really fascinating. I mean, I literally watched a situation where the doctor threw the first stone. That was weird, but kind of interesting. So I think that's about it for this. Like I said, I don't know when I'll do another Classic Era review. I doubt it will be the next one in order. I don't think I'm that committed to doing it like that. But we'll see what happens. In any case, those are my thoughts on An Unearthly Child. Have you seen it? What did you think about the very first Doctor Who story? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast that is available on Apple Podcasts and on Stitcher Radio. I'm also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast. That is a presentation of the Fire and Water Podcast Network. fireandwaterpodcast.com. Links for all this stuff is down below. And until next time, this council is adjourned.